UNFCCC, within its text, also very clearly puts out that there is an obligation by the developed countries to provide financing to less developed countries so that they can pay for that adaptation, so that that technology that is necessary for them to adapt comes to them without any extra costs and burdens to them. It's almost an implied condition, this global climate finance, and which is why in 2010, when COP met in the Mexican city of Cancun, the big countries, the G20, the developed countries pledged that they would provide within 10 years $100 billion of climate finance. There were elections in the United States. George Bush, his term finished in 2008. Barack Obama was elected in 2008. He served 2 terms. And towards the end of his second term, he sent his climate envoy and former foreign minister John Kerry to the French city of Paris so that America could renegotiate or re-enter the Conference of Parties and play a meaningful role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'm summarizing, but broadly speaking, the United States had a problem with mandatory emission cuts of the Kyoto Protocol. Mandatory hum pe na kare. And at that time, Barack Obama's government proposed to the COP that we will agree to greenhouse gas emission reductions. As a matter of fact, every country should do their best to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what we're going to put into the Paris Agreement. However, the American Congress at the time was Republican. And under American constitutional law, any treaty that the president signs has to be ratified by that Congress. It has to be made law in that country. And John Kerry said that the Republican Congress at the time would not ratify any agreement that had mandatory emission reductions in it. However, America, the rest of the world wanted America to re-enter the climate fold, as it were. And so the Paris Agreement, which requires countries to have their most ambitious emissions reductions on record and give every 5 years the United Nations, we are going to do the following, it's called CDMs, right? It's the most amount of greenhouse gas emissions you can put down on paper for 5 years. However, it's voluntary. The Paris Agreement is voluntary. And so it was signed and everyone loved the Paris Agreement because the big player, America, was back in the game. They'd signed on. It was fantastic. And then there was an election in 2016 and Donald Trump was elected. And do you know the first thing he did? He stepped out of the Paris Agreement in 2020. So there's this, the 10 years since Paris have seen at the international level, the big players play a sort of deception with the rest of the world, no less. Promising to enter the Paris Agreement, then stepping out again, changing the nature of how we're going to do it, whether it's going to be mandatory or voluntary. These things, they have manifestations. Now, the reality is that since the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, whose objective is to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions, since then, 30 years ago or more, this earth has produced more greenhouse gases than all of human history before 1992. I'll repeat that. There's been no stabilization of greenhouse gases. None whatsoever. And as far as the promises of climate finance are concerned, the $100 billion that were pledged in 2010, climate finance right now, the capitalization of that fund is under $20 billion. Right now, as of today, under $20 billion. And just to put this into context, these are rich countries promising poorer countries, we're going to give you money so that you can protect yourself from the climate change we've caused. That pledge. ठीक है? उसके 20% नहीं भरे उन्होंने. Last year, the United States gave the Ukraine and Israel $90 billion to fight war and genocide. One country paid what basically the global north pledged to pay. Over 10 years, one country paid 2 countries in 1 year to do war and to do genocide. And this worries me because as far as the genocide in Gaza is concerned, the only solution to genocide is international law. That's what we did after World War II. We put up these protocols so that genocide wouldn't happen. We set up criminal courts. We set up war crime tribunals. There's the Geneva Conventions, all sorts of laws on war. And in many ways, climate change is also, it's the end of our civilization. I'm not saying that human beings will die, but the present civilization that's supported on this ecosystem, that is going to collapse. It's a kind of genocide. And what the UNFCCC and COP is international law trying to stop climate change. But if international law can't fix genocide in Gaza, which is a small part of the world, I worry that it can't be used at scale to save us from a climate catastrophe. So the optimism of Paris has very much been run down by subsequent events. And as our friend Adil Najm says, that if you've tried to do something 30 times and it hasn't worked, you have to reassess how you're doing it. And there are valid reasons to be skeptical of the COP process. Ashana, witness to that itself. Seriously, why does Pakistan go? Kuch hota to hai nahi. Agar hum jaye bhi na, koi fark padega. But it is the only game in town. And this is also the important thing of not losing hope. But COP is the only way we're going to have to fix it. We have to go. It's going to cost us money. It's going to cost Pakistan money. People here are going to complain that our delegation wahan jaake paise kharch di. Haan, but what else can we do? Shor to hame uthana padega. As far as Pakistan is concerned, over the last 10 years, I think awareness on climate and climate reporting has certainly spiked upwards, despite my reservations earlier. We had the 10 billion tree tsunami of the PTI government. And of course, the enthusiasm of that government in climate change. We had a fantastic special advisor who traveled the world in this showcase project of Billion Tree Tsunami. And it was also during the PTI government that there was a revision made in our national climate policy and as well as our nationally determined contributions, NDCs, under the Paris Agreement in 2021, which were all very well reported. But I remember before, for many years, I'd always wished for climate change issues to be part of mainstream politics in Pakistan. But you have to be careful what you wish for. Because when things become political, that's exactly what they become. They become political. And so trying to say, what we got a lot in that period was Pakistan is doing everything regarding climate change, it's planting trees. That was the dominant narrative. When we know for a fact that there's much more that we needed to do with respect to climate change. But because our politicians were saying it, it was being reported by the media, and you don't get the nuances of it at all. Then in 2022, when the Conference of Parties took place in Sharm el-Sheikh, 2022 was the year that Pakistan was devastated by a flood, which was very much climate change. The weather attribution on that rain, especially the rains that fell in Sindh and Balochistan that year, over 50% of the intensity of those rains, which were so powerful that they created a 100-kilometer lake that could be seen from space. 50% of the intensity of that rains were caused by climate change. We know that. That was not a natural disaster. So Pakistan became the poster child of something called the Loss and Damage Fund, a new climate fund that would be given to money, that would provide money to countries whose economies had been devastated by a climate impact. Pakistan at that point in time was coincidentally the chair of the G77 plus China group of countries that negotiates at COP, which gave it a significant leveraging position, and ably led at the time by Senator Sherry Rahman and Asif Shah as Secretary Ministry of Climate Change, a fantastic team that negotiated very hard and very well, and very much determined at the launch of the Loss and Damage Fund at Sharm el-Sheikh. It was quite a moment of optimism. But agar climate fund ke andar paise nahi dalne ko tayar, the Loss and Damage Fund is not going to get any money either. The Loss and Damage Fund, which should be in the trillions, right now is capitalized to a few hundred million. I mean, it's remarkable. Aur usme abhi tak America ne pata kitne paise diye? $17 million, $17 million to the Loss and Damage. It's almost an insult, that amount of money. And when you look at the type of contributions in the capitalization of the L&D fund, you realize that maybe Sharm el-Sheikh had nothing else to show for it but the Loss and Damage Fund. So they polish that little bit of news to get as much out of it as they could. And good news in Pakistan the last 10 years, and as of August last year, all our provinces have climate policies. So climate change, which is actually climate response is actually a provincial subject. All of your climate things like water, irrigation, agriculture, forestry, livestock, these are all provincial subjects. So really governance on climate is a provincial subject, and very happy to report that all 4 provinces, Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Jammu and Kashmir, have their policies and action plans in place. So we are moving forward, but at the same time, if you look at the post-2022 flood rehabilitation in Sindh, where Pakistan is currently undertaking the largest home reconstruction project in history. इससे पहले जब काठमांडू में वो earthquake आया था 2014 में, there were about over 100,000 homes that had to be rebuilt, and that was the largest rebuilding project on earth at the time. In Sindh, right now, over 1 million homes are being built, which puts it at scale much larger in terms of a reconstruction project anywhere in the world. And it is being financed by the World Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, a bunch of other multilaterals. And as of a few months ago, the government of Sindh had received over $1 billion in this reconstruction money, in the form of loans, by the way, not in the form of grants or anything. Ye loan aaya tha World Bank se. And it's putting that money to use, it says, to build homes for people impacted by the floods. Earlier this year, I was on a fact-finding mission with South Asians for Human Rights, and we visited several districts in Sindh and saw almost no reconstruction work. Almost none. I saw villages this year that had been impacted with floods. No road, school to bhul jaye. No electricity. Now, we've taken ₹1 billion in loans. We're going to be expanding it to 1.8 billion, one province alone. And we're building almost very few of these brick cubes. You have to look at them as well. It's a cube. Plain through TV that makes it flood resistant, but it's a one-room box. There's no kitchen, there's no bathroom, and you're putting families in that. Almost no questioning of this has been done in our media at all. That's over 1 million people who are set to receive this type of housing on a type of finance that comes under the name of climate finance loss and damage. Almost no reporting being done on this. And then, even this year, it was the 18th of August that the Flood Forecasting Division of the Met Department issued a notification saying it's going to start raining. On the 24th, it's going to flood here. On the 26th, it's going to flood here. On the 4th of September, the flood is going to reach Guddu. On the 18th of August. Which is why it was surprising the first weeks of September to see people inundated in flood waters in South Punjab, Alipur, Multan. Shocking that hundreds of thousands of people 2 weeks later were still underwater. There was no rescue for them. The beginnings of the flood were fine, but towards the end it was appalling. So poor governance remains this thing that makes climate change so much more worse in Pakistan, even though we see an uptick in how it is being received in the media and in our policies. Which brings me back to my original point. When you're reporting on climate change, there is much to report, but you have to get the climate knowledge right as well. And I mean, I'm a lawyer. I'm very lucky to have had mentors who have taught me. Otherwise, this is not stuff I would have picked up, you know. And maybe this is one of the things, an interplay between people who are doing climate reporting and schools of geography and, you know, irrigation, so that the background knowledge can be a little bit more improved. And with those words, I would like to thank you for your attention.